What if everything you were taught about money was wrong? Not a little wrong, completely backwards. One man grew up with two fathers. One was highly educated with a steady job and a good salary. The other never finished 8th grade, yet became one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii. One father taught him to work for money. The other taught him to make money work for him. This is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Chapter 1. The Two Fathers. Robert Kiyosaki grew up in Hawaii with two father figures shaping his view of money. His real father, the poor dad, was a highly educated man, a PhD, who held a respected position as the head of education for the state. He believed in working hard, climbing the corporate ladder, and saving for retirement. He told Robert to study hard, get good grades, and find a safe, secure job with benefits. His best friend Mike's father, the rich dad, never finished 8th grade, yet built a business empire from nothing, eventually becoming one of the wealthiest men in the islands. He believed in financial education, taking calculated risks, and building assets that generate income, regardless of formal schooling. Both men gave young Robert advice about money, and both men genuinely believed they were right. But their advice could not have been more different. Poor Dad said, the love of money is the root of all evil. Rich Dad said, the lack of money is the root of all evil. Poor Dad said, I can't afford it. Rich Dad forbade those words and instead asked, how can I afford it? That single shift in language, from a statement that closes the mind to a question that opens it, became one of the most powerful lessons in the entire book. From an early age, Robert had a choice between these two voices, two mindsets, two completely different paths through life. Chapter 2. The Rich Don't Work for Money. At 9 years old, Robert and his friend Mike wanted to make money, so they asked Rich Dad to teach them how. Rich Dad agreed, but not in the way they expected. Instead of paying them a fair wage, he offered them jobs at his store for 10 cents an hour. An insultingly low amount, even in that era. The boys worked anyway, hoping it would lead somewhere. After weeks of working for almost nothing, they grew frustrated and demanded a raise. Rich Dad refused, and instead, he fired them. The boys were furious, feeling cheated and used. But this was exactly the lesson Rich Dad wanted to teach. He explained that most people spend their entire lives angry at their employer, blaming their boss, blaming the economy, blaming everyone except themselves, all while doing nothing to change their financial education. They go to school, get a job, earn a paycheck, pay their bills, and repeat that exact cycle for 40 years, hoping a raise or a promotion will finally make them feel secure. Rich Dad called this endless cycle the rat race. People running faster and faster on a wheel that never actually takes them anywhere. The only way to escape it is to stop trading time for money and instead learn to make money work for you, which requires a completely different kind of education than the one taught in schools. Chapter 3. Why Teach Financial Literacy? Rich Dad believed schools do an excellent job preparing people to become employees, but almost nothing to prepare them to become wealthy. Children spend years learning math, reading, and writing, valuable skills for certain, but they graduate without ever learning the difference between an asset and a liability, without understanding how interest, debt, or taxes actually function in the real world. They are taught to find a safe job, not to build wealth or understand money. As a result, the vast majority of people spend their entire working lives employed by someone else, trading decades of their life for a paycheck, while a small number of people who do understand how money works use that knowledge to build real wealth. Financial literacy, Rich Dad explained, is rarely taught in classrooms because most teachers themselves were never taught it either. It is learned instead through real experience, through mentorship from people who have actually built wealth, and through a willingness to take risks and make mistakes that most people are simply too afraid to take. Chapter 4. Mind Your Own Business. Many people confuse their profession with their business, and this confusion keeps them poor for their entire lives. A man might work as a bank manager for 30 years, climbing the ranks, earning promotions, and feeling proud of his career. But that bank is not his business. It is the bank's business. And when he retires, he leaves with nothing but a pension, while the bank continues to generate wealth for its true owners. Rich Dad taught that everyone, regardless of their job title, should mind their own business on the side, meaning they should spend time and energy building their personal asset column, even while working a full-time job to pay the bills. Your profession pays your bills today. Your business, the assets you quietly build in the background, determines your freedom tomorrow. The wealthiest people in the world spend the majority of their time and energy acquiring income-generating assets, things like real estate, stocks, and ownership in businesses, rather than pouring every ounce of their energy purely into climbing a corporate ladder that ultimately benefits someone else.
Chapter 5. The History of Taxes. Taxes were originally introduced as a temporary measure aimed primarily at the wealthy, but over generations, that burden gradually shifted onto the middle class and the poor. Meanwhile, the wealthy studied the tax code closely and learned how to legally use corporations and business structures to protect and grow their income. A corporation, Rich Dad explained, allows a business owner to earn money, spend on legitimate expenses, and then pay taxes only on what remains. An employee, on the other hand, earns money, has taxes removed immediately from their paycheck, and only then gets to spend whatever is left over. This single difference in order, earn, spend, pay taxes, versus earn, pay taxes, spend, is one of the most significant financial advantages available to business owners and investors. Rich Dad taught that understanding this system and legally using corporate structures is not about avoiding responsibility. It is simply about understanding the rules of money that schools never teach and that most employees never bother to learn.
Chapter 6. The Rich Invent Money. Opportunities to build wealth surround us every single day, but most people are conditioned from childhood to see risk and danger first, rather than opportunity. Rich Dad believed that financial intelligence has very little to do with how much money a person earns. Instead, it is about how much of that money they actually keep, how hard that money works on their behalf while they sleep, and how many future generations that wealth can support. The truly rich are rarely smarter or luckier than everyone else, but they are willing to take calculated, informed risks, to learn quickly from failure instead of being paralyzed by it, and to spot opportunities hiding in situations where most people only see fear and uncertainty. Robert Kiyosaki shares a real estate deal he discovered, a property most investors had already dismissed and walked away from. Where others saw a hopeless situation, Robert saw a creative financing opportunity, and through patience and negotiation, that overlooked property became a source of real, ongoing profit, proving that wealth is often invented through imagination rather than simply inherited or earned through labor. Chapter 7. Work to learn. Don't work for money. Many young people are taught by well-meaning parents and counselors to choose a career path based primarily on salary, choosing whichever job offers the biggest paycheck right out of school. Rich Dad believed this advice, while common, was a serious mistake. Instead of asking how much a particular job pays, Rich Dad encouraged people to ask what skills that job will teach them. Sales skills, public speaking, leadership, negotiation, and a working understanding of money and markets are far more valuable across an entire lifetime than a slightly higher starting salary. Robert Kiyosaki himself intentionally took jobs specifically because they would teach him skills he was lacking, even when those positions paid noticeably less than other offers on the table. Years later, those exact skills, the ability to sell, to lead, to negotiate, and to understand financial statements, became the true foundation underneath his eventual financial success, far outweighing whatever short-term salary difference he had given up. Chapter 8. Assets and Liabilities Explained. The single most important financial lesson in this entire book comes down to one simple distinction: the difference between an asset and a liability. An asset is anything that puts money into your pocket, whether or not you personally show up to work that day. A liability is anything that takes money out of your pocket every single month, regardless of how you feel about it. Most people sincerely believe their personal home is an asset, the biggest asset they will ever own. But if that home does not generate income and instead consistently costs money every month through mortgage interest, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, then by definition it is actually a liability sitting on the family balance sheet. Rich dads summarize the entire wealth gap in society with one simple pattern. The poor acquire liabilities, believing wrongly that they are assets. The middle class also acquires liabilities, but works incredibly hard to convince themselves and others that those liabilities are assets. The rich, however, consistently acquire real, income-producing assets. Things like rental properties that generate monthly cash flow, dividend-paying stocks, bonds, and ownership stakes in businesses that continue generating income whether the owner is actively working or not.
Chapter 9. Corporations, the Rich Man's Secret. Beyond simply owning assets, Rich Dad revealed that the truly wealthy rarely own anything directly in their own personal name. Instead, they use corporations and legal entities as protective shells around their assets. This single structural choice provides two enormous advantages that most employees never access. First, it offers legal protection, shielding personal wealth from lawsuits and creditors that might otherwise reach directly into a person's life savings. Second, and just as importantly, it provides significant tax advantages, since business expenses, including things like vehicles, travel, and even certain home office costs, can often be paid for using money earned before taxes are calculated. An employee earning a salary has almost none of these protections or advantages. Rich Dad did not present this knowledge as a loophole for the dishonest, but rather as a legitimate, learnable skill. One more piece of financial education that simply is not handed to people working a traditional job. Chapter 10. Overcoming Obstacles. Even after fully understanding these lessons intellectually, most people still fail to apply them in real life, and Rich Dad identified 5 specific obstacles that consistently stand in the way. The first is fear, particularly the fear of losing money, which keeps countless people from ever making their first investment. The second is cynicism, a defensive habit of doubting every single opportunity before even properly evaluating it. The third is laziness, often disguised respectably as simply being too busy with work and family to learn something new. The fourth is bad habits, especially poor spending habits, which keep people financially trapped regardless of how much money they actually earn each month. And the fifth is arrogance, the dangerous belief that one already knows enough, which quietly prevents a person from ever expanding their financial knowledge further. Rich Dad insisted that simply recognizing these 5 obstacles by name in oneself is the essential first step toward finally overcoming them.
Chapter 11. Getting Started. The 10 Steps. Rich Dad eventually gave Robert a structured list of 10 steps to begin building real wealth, starting with finding a reason greater than reality itself, a purpose powerful enough to push a person through inevitable setbacks and challenges. From that foundation, the remaining steps include making a daily choice to keep learning, choosing friends carefully based on their financial mindset rather than simple comfort, mastering one financial formula thoroughly before moving on to learn new ones, paying yourself first before any other bill, even before taxes are paid, paying your brokers and advisors well because skilled people will continue bringing you better opportunities when properly compensated, becoming what Rich Dad jokingly called an Indian giver, meaning getting your original investment back as quickly as possible while still retaining ownership of the underlying asset, using assets to purchase luxuries instead of buying luxuries directly with earned income, choosing real heroes to study and model long-term success after, and finally, teaching others everything you learn along the way, since teaching consistently deepens and reinforces your own personal understanding.
Chapter 12. Still want more? Here are some to-dos. Beyond those 10 foundational steps, Rich Dad also offered a list of practical, immediate actions that anyone could begin taking right away.
Stop whatever financial habits currently are not working and honestly assess which parts of your current approach are succeeding and which clearly are not. Actively look for new ideas inside books, seminars, and the daily habits of successful people already around you. Find someone who has already accomplished what you personally want to achieve and learn directly and humbly from their real-world experience. Take relevant classes, read focused books, and attend seminars specifically related to your own financial goals rather than general advice that does not apply to your situation. Make many offers when searching for investment opportunities because most people are simply too afraid to even ask, leaving surprising amounts of opportunity on the table for those willing to try. And finally, remember that action always outperforms inaction because no amount of theoretical knowledge can ever fully replace genuine real-world experience. Chapter 13: The Power of Real Estate. Among every asset class Rich Dad taught, real estate held a special place. Not because it was glamorous, but because of how it could be financed. Unlike stocks or savings, real estate allows an investor to use other people's money, typically a bank's money, to control an asset many times larger than their own initial investment. A small down payment can secure a property worth far more, and the tenants living in that property effectively pay down the mortgage every single month through their rent. Over time, the investor ends up owning a fully paid asset that they barely paid for directly out of their own pocket. Rich Dad called this leverage, and he considered it one of the most powerful tools available to an everyday person, not just to the wealthy. He warned, however, that leverage cuts both ways. Used wisely, with proper research and conservative numbers, real estate can quietly build generational wealth. Used carelessly, by overestimating rental income or underestimating expenses, that same leverage can just as easily destroy a person financially. The lesson was never that real estate is automatically safe, but that financial education turns a risky tool into a reliable one.
Chapter 14: The Cashflow Quadrant. Later in his teaching, Rich Dad introduced a simple way to picture the entire economy, divided into 4 quadrants. On one side sit employees, people who trade their time directly for a paycheck, and self-employed individuals, people who own a job rather than a business, meaning if they personally stop working, the income stops immediately as well. On the other side sit business owners, people who have built systems and teams that generate income whether they personally show up or not, and investors, people whose money itself goes to work generating more money. Most people are taught from childhood to aim only for the first quadrant, to become a secure employee. Some ambitious people move into the second quadrant, becoming self-employed professionals like doctors or consultants, only to discover they have simply traded one boss for an entire client list of bosses. True financial freedom, Rich Dad explained, is found by deliberately moving toward the business owner and investor quadrants, where income becomes increasingly disconnected from the hours a person personally works. Understanding which quadrant you currently operate in and which quadrant you are actually aiming for changes every financial decision that follows.
Final chapter: The choice is yours. The core message running through Rich Dad, Poor Dad is simple to state, yet genuinely life-changing to apply. Financial freedom has very little to do with how much money a person earns each year, and everything to do with how much of that money they actually keep and how effectively they put it to work on their behalf. The poor work for money throughout their entire lives. The middle class also works for money, while unknowingly acquiring liabilities they sincerely believe are assets. The rich, by contrast, make money work tirelessly for them by deliberately acquiring real income-generating assets year after year. This knowledge was never meant to be reserved exclusively for the wealthy. It remains fully available to absolutely anyone willing to learn it patiently, apply it consistently, and stay disciplined enough to follow through long after the initial motivation fades. The two fathers at the center of this story represent two completely different paths through life. One path leads to a lifetime spent working for money. The other path leads toward genuine financial freedom. The question Robert Kiyosaki leaves with every single reader is the exact same question he leaves with you right now. Which father's voice will you ultimately choose to follow?
The lessons inside Rich Dad, Poor Dad have quietly changed the way millions of people around the world think about money. Assets, not liabilities. Financial education, not merely a paycheck. Working to learn valuable skills, not simply working to earn a temporary wage. These principles are remarkably simple to understand on the surface, yet they genuinely require discipline and patience to apply consistently over time. If this audiobook gave you even one new way to look at your own personal finances today, that shift in thinking is the essential first step. The next step from here is entirely up to you. New audiobook every Tuesday and Friday. Subscribe so you never miss one. Thanks for listening.